Today we're doing a reading of a 3-5 self-projected projector on the cross of explanation with the sun in gate 4, the third line of gate 4, the trial and error of coming up with the right questions. So looking at this chart, we see 4 out of 9 centers defined. Single definition, they're all at the top. We see the head moving to the ajna, moving to the throat, and finding expression in the throat. And then we see the G center moving upwards to the ajna and finding expression in the throat as well. And so when you're doing readings of a human design chart, you're going to want to look at the flow of the centers, how the centers flow towards expression in the throat. The throat is the nexus where the head and the ajna flow into, and then all the lower centers there's a directionality. They're flowing towards the throat. And so probably if I were going to do a sort of directional reading, I would really look at the G center flowing to the throat here. This is the real kind of core of what this person is all about in terms of their authority. However, the personality sun, really the outer authority, we could say, is on the other side of it. The personality sun starts in the ajna. So it's, when you're doing readings, you can kind of choose where you want to begin, and there's no real hard and fast rule here other than starting at the kind of deepest point of the chart and working your way up towards the throat seems to tell a story that leads towards expression, ultimately. So essentially what we're looking at is 2 stories then. We're looking at a story from the G center, which is the story of the inner authority, and that is all about being yourself. Gate 10, self-love, love of being alive, really just being yourself. It's the story of how that gets expressed in the now, and we'll look more into that in a moment. And then on the other hand, we see the story of the incarnation cross, and which is ultimately the life purpose in terms of outer authority for other people. You could say that there's an inner purpose, which is to follow one's inner authority, but what that enables people to do is to then ultimately live their outer purpose, which is outer authority, which is communication with others, being able to express themselves to others, to communicate, to share information. And so we see this other story basically of being really a very busy, just very packed head and ajna. The head ajna connection, we have 2 of the 3 channels defined. And the personality sun is in gate 4. So the personality sun is right there to take the questions and the doubts and the concerns of the head, and it's the gate of formalization. So it's to turn them into formulas and to come up with patterns, to come up with formulas, and then ultimately to express that through the throat, through that unconscious channel of structuring. So let's go back to the G center, and we'll just talk about the G center and what it is to be a self-projected projector. All right, so they always say for projectors to wait for the invitation. I think for self-projected projectors, it's a little bit different. This is kind of a controversial area, but I feel like self-projected projectors have a different mechanism where the invitation is not exactly what guides them in life or what guides their trajectory, in the sense that the self-projected projector ultimately can rely on their own G center to guide them. It's really about the G center knowing where they should go. And the trick for the self-projected projector is that they have to discover what they already know. Which sounds funny. It's they know, but they don't have awareness of that knowledge. Part of them knows, deep inside they know, they have access. The G center knows where they should go, or the G center is prepared to guide them, and yet they don't necessarily have conscious access to this information, and the self-projected authority is a process of becoming aware of that, ultimately through listening to one's own revelation of that knowledge. It's to realize that when one is talking, one will actually speak the truth at certain times. It's really to distinguish between false and true speech, or full and empty speech. That's a term from the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, but what he basically meant was that sometimes when we're talking, it's with full speech, meaning it's speaking the truth from the unconscious. And other times, when we're talking, we're not speaking any truth. We're just speaking empty speech. And our empty speech is not accessing the unconscious. It doesn't have any truth of the unconscious there. It's not really speaking the truth of our desire. It is just made up imaginary rationalizations and so on. So it's really distinguishing between what is the mind, what language is the mind and what language is the truth of that inner authority, of that self-projected G-center authority. The truth of the form, we could say. The truth of the body. The truth of the design, and not just, what seems true, or not just a pat truth, but a deep truth. So the first thing I'm going to look at then is going to be what channel connects the G center to the throat. And here we have the 1020. And this is important because anytime you're doing a reading for a self-projected projector, you're going to want to really know what channel or channels that G center has access to the throat through. Because each one of those channels is going to have its own qualities and its own ways of speaking that you can recognize, and therefore you can learn to recognize when the G center is talking versus when someone else is talking. Not someone else, but some other psychological complex or indoctrinated belief or conditioned or introjected voice. So, for instance, gate 35 is the gate of I feel. So if you are a self-projected projector and you're listening to yourself talk and you're trying to figure out what is the true speech for you, gate 35 may be one of your attributes. I mean, in this case, we have gate 35 is activated. So this will be a way that the person talks, and it can be true. It can express this truth of when they say I feel, they're speaking with their authentic voice. But ultimately, the I feel is not going to be what guides the decision making. I feel can be an expression, a true expression, and an explanation, and so on. And it can be a way of giving outer authority to others, but the I feel is not connected to the self-projected authority. Same with gate 12, the I know, or I know I can try. The voice of I know, gate 23, is also, it's present here with the whole channel behind it. So that can be great outer authority. That can be, these channels can be there, these gates can be there to express information to others, but not to make decisions for oneself. So the gate 20 is really the authority gate then. Now, what gate 20 is about is, it's really the I am gate, or particularly I am now. I am now walking on the sidewalk. I am now heading to the post office. I am now recording this reading. I am now talking about gate 20. Or not. I am not now going to do this. I am not at this time thinking about that. I am not at this time entertaining that notion. I am not at this time planning on doing that. So when you find yourself starting with the I am now, or I am not now, or even just I am, that's a good hint that you're getting at your inner authority. Because the whole game for the self-projected projector is to listen to themselves, to record themselves even, to have others repeat things back to them. So what you're saying is, and in so doing, to realize that they themselves are already speaking their truth. It's just discernment. It's a matter of discernment. On the one hand, it's a matter of listening to what they say. You'd be amazed that people don't really listen to what they say. They don't hear themselves saying it, because in the moment of saying it, they're just saying it. And it's an interesting practice to listen to your own words as if you were a third party. To imagine, as you're talking, hearing yourself speak from the other person's perspective. This is a really good practice for self-projected projectors. So the first step is just listening. Hearing you yourself talk to others. But the second step is to discern what in that is full versus empty speech. What in what you are saying is coming from the G center, and what is coming from the head and ajna, and what is coming from the ego, and what is coming from the spleen, even though they're undefined, or coming from that undefined solar plexus. There's that gate 35 about feelings ready to be electromagnetized with a gate 36. And when that happens, when someone has gate 36 and it's an electromagnetic connection with you, what's going to happen is you're going to immediately start to feel that charge from the solar plexus, and to go, I feel this, and I feel that, I feel amazing, I feel terrible. And you can't trust that. I mean, you can use the I feel as an authentic voice and outer authority, but this is not your inner authority. Your inner authority is the G center. The G center knows where is correct for you. And this is why I started to say that I feel like for self-projected projectors, invitation is less of a tool. Invitation is less of a end-all, be-all. I mean, recognition is still very important. And to find out when you've been recognized, to know when you've really been recognized, you'll hear yourself telling someone how much recognition you felt. Now, this is just one way of getting to the G center. I have heard self-projected projectors say that they actually feel the G center, that they feel it as a subtle warmth in the sternum, or a glow, an inner glow, or just like a kind of lighting up, like their cells light up. That's how I've heard other projectors describe recognition too, whether they're splenic or solar plexus or what have you. So it's an interesting question of the non-verbal aspect of the G center, because I don't want to reductionistically say that the G center only communicates verbally. However, the core mechanic of the self-projected projector that defines them as a type is the movement of information from the G center to the throat. So there is an aspect of expression here, but there's also action. The throat is not just for talking, it's for acting, right? So it's interesting how there may be other ways to get to know your G center authority. But this is a huge warning. I've done readings for a number of self-projected projectors who it's been almost impossible for me to get through to them. See, there's something about the self-projected projector that makes it almost like individual circuitry. Now, in your case, in the case here, we're looking at a 4323 as well. 4323 is one of the 3 deaf channels, along with the 2838 and the 3955. These 3 channels are individual circuitry, and they're nicknamed the deaf channels because when they are active, they are completely resistant to outside influence. 2838 is the channel of stubbornness, but 4323 is just as stubborn. 3955 is just as stubborn. They're just different kinds of stubbornness. The 4323 is going to stubbornly hold on to what it knows or doesn't know. You'll never convince a 4323 or teach them or help them to learn. They can't when it's activated. If they don't know something, you are not going to make them know it. It's impossible for you to teach them when it's activated. Same with 3955. If they're not in the mood, you're not going to get through. So 2838, 4323, 3955, what these channels have in common, and you'll see they form a triangle on the body graph. You'll see that 2838 from the spleen to the root, 4323 from the ajna to the head, and then that 3955 from the root to the solar plexus. They form a triangle on the chart, and what they all have in common is as individual channels, it's very, very important. It's important for individual circuitry to prevent outside influence. We also know that individual circuitry is on a pulse, so these channels are going to be activated only occasionally. But anyway, so back to these readings I've done. So I'll just give an example. I did a reading for a person in Seattle, in-person reading, self-projected projector. It was very hard. For one, she has gate 63 and I have gate 4, and so I was constantly getting questions throughout the whole thing, and also she has 9 but not 52, and that compromises my 952. I'm just trying to focus and concentrate. And anyway, what it came down to was her basically saying, well, I already know everywhere I need to go and everything I need to do. And she even followed up on it over weeks and months. And this was not just a one-time thing. This was over, I would say by the end of it, we'd had conversations for about a year and a half. And by the end of this year and a half experiment with human design, she finally gave up on human design, saying it didn't really make sense to her, and that as a self-projected projector anyway, the only thing that made sense to her was that she had her own knowing, and that was enough. And so every decision that she made, she said, came from this place of inner knowing. Now, from my perspective, it was completely mental. I never touched her. Human design never touched her. It never got in to that cellular level where you're actually experimenting. And that's what it's all about, is to really, your whole life can be changed by the human design information. But in that case, I would say it was a complete failure to ever reach her. Okay, someone else is also a self-projected projector. I explained to him all about human design, really for years. He was very interested in the beginning, and kind of lost interest. But over the years I've known him, and I'll just do a little impression here. He'd say, well, I really want to quit my job. They don't appreciate me at my job. I'm working at FedEx. They don't appreciate me at FedEx. It's really not a good job for me. There's so much more I could be doing. I'm wanting to pursue a career in entertainment. I've been working on these videos I've been making, and I really want to put them out there, but I haven't put them out yet. But I know I should be putting them out, but I just haven't. And, I feel really not very good living here. I don't like living in Seattle. I get a lot of arthritis pain, physical pain from living in Seattle. And also, I really think I should break up with my girlfriend. It's just not going very well at all, and I don't really feel like we're on the same page anymore. And yeah, I just feel like I need to move from Seattle, and I need to quit my job, break up with my girlfriend, and just try something different. And I would go, wow, yeah, that sounds very insightful. And then 2 minutes later, he'd go, what should I do? What should I do? I have no idea what I should do. And I'd say, well, what about quitting your job? Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, it's a good job. I get plenty of good money. I get good benefits. Well, how about breaking up with your girlfriend? No, I don't know. I mean, things are okay. Okay, well, what about living in Seattle? Yeah, I don't really know how I feel about Seattle. You just told me how you feel. You said you don't like, well, sometimes I feel that way, but then I don't know, How do I know for sure? And so for years this went by, never reached him. So I don't want to say that self-projected projectors are any more difficult to reach than any other type, because every type has its peculiarities. But there is something particular about the self-projected projector, which is that they're really here to follow their own G center, which is their kernel or core of their identity, and the core of, it's where the magnetic monopole is. It's the core of directionality in life, knowing what direction you're going in life, trajectory in life. And because of this, I feel like the not self of the self-projected projector is just so resistant to anything. It's just like they have their trajectory. It's almost like a fixed fate kind of thing, like you find with a 4-1. They have their trajectory and they're locked into it. And the not self of the self-projected projector is just going through that, just sleepwalking that trajectory of life. And I have more examples too. I guess all I'm saying is that I have not yet had much luck getting through to a self-projected projector. And this is kind of what Ross says too. Not particularly in the terms of human design readings, but he said with a self-projected projector, they really have an inner clock, and they have an inner mechanism, and they have an inner GPS, an inner compass. And what Ross says about them is, these are the people that they're married for 20 years, and one day they just get up and leave. And you never saw it coming, and you're completely blindsided, but there is nothing you can do about it because something in their inner GPS just said, go this direction now. It's like they really are self-directed. They really are here to march to the beat of their own drum. Now, the true self version of this is beautiful. When you're living your design, the differentiated version of marching to the beat of your own drum means really the potential to become a truly unique, individual, differentiated being that can then bring so much to others through outer authority. But we all know that 99.9% of people are not self, right? This is a not self world. It's a homogenized world. And the homogenized self-projected projector is just sleepwalking guided unconsciously by that inner GPS, by that inner compass. And that compass is just telling them to go this direction and telling them to go that direction. And they're just doing it like a puppet on a string. And, I'm not saying that human design frees you from the puppet strings, because ultimately, as you decondition in human design and give power over to the form to make decisions and to the mechanical strategy and authority to make decisions, ultimately what happens is the incarnation cross takes over, and then you really are a puppet. But at that point, you're a puppet to the incarnation cross. You're not a puppet to the program. And it's, this is the whole no choice thing of human design. We don't really have a choice, but if I did have a choice, I would rather have no choice and be the unwitting, plaything of a differentiated form consciousness than I would the program. Because the program is, of course, the homogenized world out there that just makes cookie cutter people. And when you live your whole life undifferentiated, asleep, part of the program, you wake up at the end of your life a little bit, and you look back with that perspective from the end of life and go, wow, all the stuff that happened to me was stuff that's happened to other people too. And yeah, I had all the love and loss and heroism and defeat and all of that drama, the hero's myth and leaving home and coming back, and all that happened, but that happens to everybody. I didn't really, get a differentiated experience out of life. And that's what human design is here for, is to facilitate the potential of that differentiated experience, the truly differentiated experience, actually getting, so essentially, I guess what I'm saying is just, in my experience, first of all, I don't know a lot of self-projected projectors, or at least I don't know a lot who are into human design. I know some online, but I'm talking about in person, in Aura, where I can actually spend time with them in Aura. But I know a few. I have 2 other examples I can think of. And so I really have 4 that I've known pretty well. Like, for multiple years, long enough to be in many, many, many hours of conversations with them and to watch how they navigate life and so on. And so what it's really about, the challenge is for the self-projected projector, the first challenge is to simply listen to themselves. And that's already a challenge. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say that my friend would tell me everything he needs to do in life and then say a minute later, well, what should I do? I don't know what to do. It's like I should quit my job and break up with my girlfriend and leave the city, but I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, why don't you do those 3 things? Then he'll say, well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure if that's the right thing to do or not. There's so many other things to think about. There's so many factors to take into account. And this is where the mind takes over. All of the rationalizations. It's like, I tell something similar to people who have defined solar plexus, that they have to really honor the event of emotional clarity. Because the 2 problems that the solar plexus emotional beings have, one is that they act too rashly before they get clarity. The other is that they get clarity and then talk themselves out of it through their mental rationalizations. Rashness and rationalization, right? And so I would say for the self-projected projector, it's similar in that you have to not only listen to yourself speak the truth, well, I guess it's 3 parts. First, you just have to listen to yourself. Just listen to yourself and start to really notice yourself. Notice your tone of voice. Notice the content of your words. Notice what you're actually saying. Second, discernment. What am I saying that's coming from the fact that I have an electromagnetic connection with this other person, say, and they're charging me all up? That's the not self. You're hanging out with someone with gate 36. They're charging you all up. You're all emotional and you're full of emotion. Well, you're going to start saying, well, I feel this and I feel that. That's not your true voice. So the second step is all about discernment. And in this discernment, really noticing when you say, I am now or I am not now. And even practice saying that. Practice it, because as you start to say, I am or I am now, the words that appear to finish that sentence will be generated from the G center, or at least they have a higher chance of being. There's no guarantee because it's a mechanical, physical process, but you can essentially get in the habit of noticing when you are speaking from that place of truth. The third thing is honoring it. Honoring it. The same way I tell the solar plexus people to honor their clarity, you don't second guess it. It's like you notice it, you've discerned that this is actually your G center speaking, and then you honor it, and you don't just let the mind jump in and rationalize and, play the pros and cons game and all that. So that's what it's really about. It's about recognizing when the G center is talking. Now, you also have this other story, this whole head ajna story. So there's really 2 different approaches to what is ultimately the outer authority expression from the throat and the potential for this differentiated outer authority. So the first one we looked at from the G center, I would say this has to do with the love of living, the love of being alive yourself, and it's a commitment to higher principles. It's the channel of commitment to higher principles, this 1020. Well, what does this even mean? What does commitment to higher principles mean? Well, ultimately, it's the commitment to being yourself. It's the commitment to being empowered to be yourself. It's being individual, right? Being individual is all about empowerment, even though this is integration circuitry, so it could also be said it's a commitment to surviving. But what does it really mean to have that commitment to yourself? Well, we can see in Ra's chart, he has this 1020, and he was a pure integration individual ego manifester, and he has a great story about what it is to be yourself and how we're homogenized by those that are closest to us. So Ra would always take his son, he would pick up his son at school in Ibiza, and taking his son home from school, he would see a cow that was the biggest cow on the farm, and going by, Ra would roll down the window and shout, "Hey, Elvis!" Then he'd call the cow Elvis, and he would moo at it, stuff like that. Well, one day, he picks his son up from school, and his son has friends, and his son says to him, really embarrassed, quietly, "Geez, Dad, don't do that with the cow today. Don't call the cow Elvis, you'll embarrass me." Now, this is conditioning. This is how we get homogenized. The son doesn't mean to, but we're homogenized to be like everybody else. It's like, don't be a freak. Don't be an outsider, Be like everybody else. Do the normal thing. And sure enough, they get to the cow, and Ra goes, "Moo, hey Elvis," because that's who Ra was. And that's what individuals teach us. They really teach us how to be ourselves. And it's through observing them and how empowered they are to be themselves. So when I look at this first story, the story of your inner authority, of the G center to the throat, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing this individual integration, survival, commitment to higher principles, which is ultimately the commitment to being oneself. It's called the channel of awakening. And as a channel of awakening, what does it really mean to be awake? Well, to not be sleepwalking in the homogenized world. To not just be sleepwalking through the motions. I would say also it's a potential to be awake because individual circuitry does have a quality. There's really no guarantee. Individual circuitry can be the most zombie circuitry you've ever found. And if you listen to Ra talk about the individual, he goes into this, how individual circuitry is waiting for mutation, melancholically waiting for mutation. And during that waiting, which, by the way, there's no guarantee that mutation will ever come. During that waiting, the individual can be totally asleep. They can be sleepwalking. I mean, why do they call it the sleeping phoenix? It's because of that 3420, this integration, what is basically proto-individual circuitry that makes manifesting generators sleepwalk through being busy all the time. So there's all different ways of sleepwalking. And each individual channel is a way of sleepwalking. That 6124 who's asleep by pondering life's mysteries, pontificating, philosophizing, trying to know. But really they're doing it asleep. And so, what do I mean by being asleep, being awake? This is just shorthand, really, for what is, for if the mind is making decisions or not. As long as the mind is guiding the life, we're basically sleepwalking because the mind can't really be awake. It can't do that double duty. Once the mind stops making decisions, suddenly, it's amazing. The mind is now open to observing, to witnessing, to being passenger. The mind is suddenly able to look out the window. And it couldn't do that before because it was too busy driving. And it missed everything. So this is the story of the G center to the throat. It's the story of the I am myself now. I am myself now. If the 20 is the I am now, you add the 10 in there, the gate of the self. I am myself now. And it really is this commitment to being yourself and this commitment to remaining empowered and not letting others interfere with you. And so that's really the story of how it's this direct line from the truth of yourself to the throat. The ability to express through the I am now. I am myself now doing this. I am myself now thinking that, and so on. So the other story starts in the head. And it starts with the two collective channels of the head. So let's start it with the logical channel, since that's where the personality sun is. So we start with the channel of logic. And this is a story of what will ultimately lead to outer authority, to the ability to influence others, to affect others, to really guide others. So, the channel of logic is what you get. It's basically, it is a core aspect of logical circuitry that it's all about noticing problems in the pattern and then throwing away the pattern or making a new one or improving the formula that predicts the pattern. It's all about formulas, it's all about patterns, and ultimately where this begins is noticing whether the pattern is suspicious or not. You're looking at the pattern, you see all this uniform data, then you see an anomaly. You see it's an anomaly, it's something that doesn't fit in. That is what 63.4 is all about. 63 is identifying the pattern and to judge if it is suspicious or not. And it's good at it. The thing is, even if you have a defined center, we always talk about the not self themes and the undefined centers. Even if you have a defined center, if you're not really awake, if you're not really living your design, which means really surrendering to the mechanical decision-making process of the form, then you might be really, really good at what channels you have. But its ultimate outcome is not going to be so great. You might be great at discovering where the flaw is, where the anomaly is, basically doubting, having a good skeptical mind, doubting things. But without really being in touch with your G-center authority, you're not going to know what to doubt. You're going to doubt something that, threatens that undefined ego. Or you're going to doubt something that tells you to stop trying to prove. Or you're going to doubt something that challenges the undefined solar plexus. Anything that, because the not self of the undefined ego is always trying to prove itself. The not self of the undefined solar plexus is always trying to hide, to avoid confrontation and truth, and so on. The not self of the undefined sacral is so greedy, always wanting more and more and more. So somebody comes to you and they give you something, and what they give you is basically something that's going to help you never have to prove again, and not worry about hiding, and not be afraid of confrontation and truth anymore, and to stop overdoing it so much. And you're going to doubt it. You're going to apply all that skepticism toward the thing that could really help you, simply because it sets off all these alarms, and the alarms are the mind, which is constantly making decisions, right? And it's making decisions according to the not self criteria. So in the second half of this reading, we're going to go into the not self, and we're going to see how the mind makes its decisions. And while the mind is making its decisions, then you'll see how, you have this amazing, this 63.4 means you have an incredible mind, really. An incredible mind for finding flaws in the patterns, for finding mistakes, all this stuff. You also have an incredible mind for making sense out of confusion, for getting clarity. It's like you have a mind for asking questions, for seeing mistakes, for seeing flaws, for finding. It's a very skeptical mind, and on the other hand, that 64.47, a mind that is sometimes confused, but will generally think through that confusion until a moment of clarity. So it can be a very clear mind as well. And yet, it's not enough to just have a defined channel to avoid the not self. Some people think, because we only talk about the not self themes of the undefined channels, that the fact you have a defined channel, great. Well, if you have a defined center, it means you're off the hook. No, because if you're still making mental decisions according to the not self hierarchy of trying to prove yourself and trying to avoid confrontation and all the other stuff, then you're going to be skeptical of all the wrong things, and you're going to be clear about all the wrong things. You can see that these two channels are great gifts, but they're gifts that are going to be misguided if you're not truly awake, if you're not truly living your design. So looking at the head channels from the head to the ajna, we could say that You're a logical, clear thinker, a good judge of suspicious patterns. And that what this all leads into, what the clarity that comes from thinking about past experiences that were confusing and making sense of them from the 6447, as well as the mental ease that comes from being skeptical and doubting and then finding the answers to these doubts and the answers to these questions, all that is filtered into the channel of structuring, the 4323. So ultimately that feeds into the knowing circuit, the experiential, abstract sensing circuit on the 6447 side, and the logical understanding circuit on the 63-4 side, both filter into the individual knowing circuit. And this is the voice of I know. So just from this alone, we can already start to string the keynotes. You know, you can be a skeptical know-it-all, or you can be, if we look at the 4323, they call it the freak and the genius. So on the one hand, you're a skeptical know-it-all or a confused freak. On the other hand, you can be a clear-minded genius who has all the answers. You can see different ways of splicing together the keynotes from this binary. You're a logical, clear-minded genius, or, you know, a judgmental, skeptical know-it-all, or a confused freak, right? And we look at what the 4323 has. 43 is the gate of breakthrough, the gate of insight. So it can be, if you kind of follow the gates, look at 64 is the gate of confusion, gate 47 is making sense of it, and then gate 43 is having that breakthrough or that insight. And ultimately, it has to be chopped up into little pieces. It has to be split apart in gate 23 and structured in a way that it can be assimilated by others. So one of your roles here is to take things that are confusing, to make sense of them, to have breakthroughs and insights, and then to structure those breakthroughs and insights in such a way that they can be assimilated by others. On the other hand, you're here to have a very mentally easy, relaxed mind that's not full of activity, that is observing the patterns and judging the patterns and saying, is it suspicious or not? This one, no. Aha, there we go. There's a suspicious pattern. Then you look at that suspicious pattern and you're skeptical and you're doubtful, and then you follow it through until you get the answers that you need. Gate 4. And those answers are going to be formalizations. And this is your personality sun. So this is a huge part of you. Huge part of you. 70% of your personality is this person has the answers. Here is someone who has the answers. You know, and you do, right? Now, of course, you're a third line, so a lot of times the answer is, well, let's see what happens. Because the third line is the trial and error process of just seeing what happens. So there is going to be a lot of that experiential in there. But from this side of the story, we're looking at this skeptical 63, noticing that the pattern is suspicious, judging that it's suspicious, leading to the 4, which finds the answers. You can think of it almost like a Columbo or a Hercule Poirot kind of detective novel, private investigator, right? And you noticed the suspicious pattern, you found the answers. Now you have to have a breakthrough or an insight from that the answers lead to the breakthrough. And again, you're left with the task of structuring that breakthrough in a way that it can be assimilated by others. To do that, you have to split it apart into little pieces, little bite-sized pieces. This is what Ra had to do. You know, Ra had the 4323, and he had this tremendous breakthrough all this tremendous insight about human design. Then his task was to break it into little pieces and to structure it over the next 25 years for other people to assimilate. Just as a side note here, you can see how the personality and the design activations play a part. Your 63-4 is completely conscious, for instance, completely personality side. So the 63-4, you're looking at it and you're going, okay, I see how logic involves judging if patterns are suspicious and then coming up with formulas to explain them. It comes to the process of formalization. But on the other side, the abstract process is more mysterious. Only half of the abstract mental process is visible to you. The confusing half. Because the whole point about the 64-47, it's a design of mental activity. So it's people that have very busy, racing minds. Racing. Compared to the 63-4, which these people have very still minds. Mental ease, right? But on the 64-47 side, this is about having a very busy mind, and it's busy with all the pressure to make sense out of all this confusing stuff. It's super confused. It takes in all the confusion and it says, God, I can't stand this pressure. Let's get rid of this pressure. And I mean, I guess because it's defined, you can withstand the pressure a bit more. But at the very least, let's use the pressure to energize the abstract mental stream. And let's take that pressure and use it to try to gain clarity. It's about sense making, getting clarity. It's like, God, my taxes are so confusing. I'm just going to keep working at it until I get clear on what exactly is happening here. Or, anything really. It could be, I'm a computer programmer by day, and I can tell you a lot of programming is taking a lot of confusing stuff and eventually finding clarity from that. So you can see, to get the clarity on the abstract side, that clarity is unconscious. It's a red activation, means it's a design side activation. So how the clarity happens is going to be a mystery. It's like, well, I was really confused, and then voila, suddenly I was clear about it. And I don't know how, And suddenly I had this moment of clarity. So it's really, if you're looking at a channel and half the channel is personality and half is design, the design side will be a mystery. You're not going to really know how that happens. Now, the same is true with the entire channel of structuring. We're looking at the 43-23. The whole channel is red. It's entirely on the design side. What this means is that you're going to do it. You're not going to really know how you do it. You're going to be structuring things and you're going to be explaining them to others. But there's really going to be this question of how did that happen? There's not a lot of visibility into it. It's kind of just an automatic thing. Now, there's a few other points about this. That 43-23, just a couple side notes here. 43-23 is really obligated to explain itself to the collective and to the tribe. And if they can't explain themselves, they're going to be punished for it. So it's something to realize that you have to be able to explain yourself. You have to be able to explain what you're thinking. You have to be successful in your structuring to where it can be assimilated by others. And you can find a lot of melancholia here when the individual is not heard or not understood. There's a real yearning to be understood from the individual here. And it's necessary. It's an obligation of the individual. So just know that you have to be able to explain yourself. Okay, one of the other things about this is a genius when it's living its true self, but it's a freak as the not self. And the freak is the one who's ostracized from the social group precisely because they couldn't explain themselves. That's the only difference. The difference in the genius and the freak is the genius could explain themselves well. It reminds me of something Carl Jung said. He said that he was convinced that even the most impossible cases of schizophrenia, the most impossible psychoses, could be understood with enough patience to translate what the psychotic was saying through amplifying through myths and legends and alchemical symbolism and dream symbolism and symbolism of the collective unconscious and religious symbolism and so on. And if you really had this vast knowledge of symbolism and were able to amplify what they were saying by connecting it to all of these different myths and legends and so on, you would basically be able to translate the ravings of a psychotic lunatic into something all of us can understand, and this would have a curative effect. In fact, the disciple of Carl Jung, Marie-Louise von Franz, said something similar, which is that she had seen a psychotic patient who had explained to her all the delusions in language nobody could normally understand, but she was able to understand it. Von Franz was, because she was a Jungian analyst who was well-versed in alchemical symbolism and all this stuff. And she was able to translate it and understand it and explain it back to the psychotic patient. And even though the psychotic patient didn't understand her, the whole encounter nevertheless had a curative effect, a healing effect on the patient, because the patient felt understood. So you can see how important it is for the individual to be able to explain themselves to the group. The other little side note I have here is that the 4323 is especially suited for guiding 3420s. The 3420 manifesting generator, see, the 4323, the 3420, and the 3740 are three special channels in the body graph. They're special because they're the only three channels that activate via opposition in the wheel. What that means is 37 and 40 are opposite in the wheel, 34 and 20 are opposite in the wheel, and 4323 are opposite in the wheel. And the rest of the channels are not oppositions. They're not 180 degree opposite in the wheel. And so what this means when you have an opposition is that it's going to be activated much more frequently, because the sun and the earth are always in opposition, and the north and south node are always in opposition. So what that means is for 5.7 days, twice a year, 4323 will be activated for everybody born during that time. Then for another 5.7 days, 3420 will be activated for everyone born during that time, and so on for the 3740. In addition to this, they will also be activated regularly by other planetary bodies. So you end up with by far higher amount of those three channels than any other channel. And there's more to it than that. What you'll find is the 4323, the 3420, and the 3740, these are, I guess you could call them remnants of an earlier evolutionary strain in some sense, or at least analogs to an earlier evolutionary form, where they're kind of fundamental to the structuring of society. You have the 3740, which is the... Oh, it's okay. You're fine. You have the 3740, which is the... It's about the family, and it's about community, and it's the channel of the bargain. And basically, it's part of the cross of planning, which is the global cycle we've been in for the last 400 years. But even beyond that, it's fundamental to humanity. I mean, even going back to before the nine-centered being, there was an analog here, or at least it harkens back to our evolutionary history of really the need to come together in mutual support. It's tribal. It's about mutual support. It's about coming together. And in some sense, it's also where you get the I guess I would call it the priesthood, or the it's not exactly the gate of the priesthood, because that would be gate 25 is the shaman or the priest or priestess. But in a sense, it's organized religion. It's part of the mystical way. If you hear Ra's lectures from the Rave Cosmology series, where he does the mystical way, you get more insight into the 3740 and its role. And so you can see that it's integral for kind of creating the, I don't know, just this communal backbone, this communitarian backbone. And then you see the 3420. And the 3420 is absolutely an essential worker. These people are the hardest workers you ever found, except for somebody with an undefined sacral who's going to be amplifying that. But you take a 3740, you find 3420, you find incredibly busy people. This is the manifesting generator. They're so busy. They're just multitasking and juggling all this stuff. It's a big, powerful manifester crammed into a little generator body, or however you want to look at that. A big generator aura with that manifester directedness. So, and then you look at the 4323, and that's what you have. And the 4323 is really in charge. I mean, it's kind of in charge. It's the one who can actually, if they can successfully have that breakthrough, successfully have that insight, and then more than just having it, express it to others. And remember, this is a projected channel. It has to be recognized. Someone has to recognize that genius, and they have to invite you to share that genius with them. Then you have to be able to successfully do it in a way they can assimilate it, in a way that they can digest it. And when that happens, it's really in charge. So I just always advise 4323s to find 3420s, and vice versa. When I do readings for a 3420 who are always manifesting generators, because it's the manifesting generator channel, I always tell them, hey, you have so much energy, you just need to know what to use it for. You need to know where to put it. So find a 4323 in your life and ask them. Invite them. See what insights they have. So this brings me to my next point about projectors, which is that for the projector, other people in your life are going to be so important. It's true for generators also, but I would say for generators, the most important thing, and for manifesting generators, is what they do with their energy. It's their work. It's the work they do. For projectors, it's not about work. You're not here to work, as you know, and what it's about is the people in your life and guiding their energy. But also, see, it's not just altruistic. It's not like you're just here to coordinate and guide them. I mean, you are, but you get something out of it too. You get their energy, which is why I've heard a lot about projectors guiding other projectors and guiding manifestors and guiding reflectors. Well, sure, but it's really about guiding the generators, and in your case, the manifesting generators in your life, the 3420s, I mean. And what you get from them is their energy, and you get a good quality of their energy. And when they're satisfied, you get that satisfied energy. So it's interesting to think about that so much of your quality of life depends on their satisfaction and not vice versa. If you're surrounded with frustrated generators, it's not good. It's not healthy for you. I mean, spending time with them, you're taking in their energy. And so we talk a lot in human design about how bad conditioning is and conditioning. And for projectors, it's about the correct conditioning. Being around the correct conditioning. Being around the right people. Now, in your case, you have a defined G center, so you know who these people are. You have access to these people, and you do it through that defined G center, which has an awareness of who's correct for it and of where is the correct place to be. It's not like the undefined G center where they're so heavily impacted by their environment. Quite the opposite. You impact your environment. You go to a place and your defined G center puts out a frequency there and helps make that environment what it is. So the question is not discernment of the correct environment. It's just discernment of what is your true voice or not, and getting that information out. See what I'm saying? Like, for an undefined G center, they would have to really contemplate who's correct for them and where is correct for them. And for you, you know it. You know it, and you're very fixed in this way. A defined G center, you like what you like, and if you like it, you're going to like it your whole life because it's fixed in what it likes and dislikes. It's fixed in what it loves. It's fixed in who are the right people for it. Undefined G center could love anyone. Anyone. They have the ultimate flexibility. Defined G center is all about being very fixed in the kind of people you love, very fixed in the kind of places you like, and so on. So it's just a side note to say, this is what the projector is here for. This is how important it is for the projector to be around the right people and to be around generators that are satisfied and also that recognize you. And they have 4 different ways they can recognize you. I mean, I guess there's a general recognition beyond the 4 ways. The general recognition is just recognition of you and your uniqueness. But what this really means, if we break it down, is that there's 4 particular channels, 4 parts of the life force energy that you emit that have the potential to be differentiated. And in their differentiation, the potential for that differentiation to be recognized by the other. So I'm just going to kind of take a step back. There's general homogenized not self-recognition, which is, how we recognize a celebrity by giving him an Oscar, a movie star, or a singer or a musician by giving them a Grammy, or a Nobel Prize, or, So that's one form of recognition. That's the very homogenized kind of not self-recognition. Or recognizing little aspects of a person. And then there's the homogenized recognition of their characteristics. Like, an example of that would be just recognizing what characteristics you have, like at the very basic level of inklings of recognition of appreciating certain obvious aspects of you that the other can recognize, or even less obvious ones. But then as we go deeper, we see that there's actually recognition is possible on any projected channel. Any projected channel bears the possibility of recognition. And that recognition can be really homogenized, just like, this person's a genius. It could be really homogenized. Somebody who just thinks you're a genius, but doesn't actually see the differentiation of that 4323. Or they might just go, oh yeah, this person really knows who they are, or has a strong sense of being themselves. Or even like more basic, wow, this person is, well behaved, because that gate 10 is known for being well behaved. Although you have the 10-3, which is you have the 10-3 and the 10-4. The 10-3 is going to see what it can get away with in terms of behavior. It's going to go, oh, let's test what happens if I sing and dance on the table at the restaurant, or let's see what happens if I, take my shoes off and put my feet up on the table and stuff like that. But regardless, you could be recognized for these characteristics or for the basic of the channel. But what happens is, as you differentiate, as you follow your strategy and authority, you change at a cellular level, and suddenly there's this differentiation that occurs at the level of the channels, where you're not just living out the characteristics of the gates, you're not just living out the basic generic of the channel, you're not just living out the generic of the 3-5 or the generic of any of the lines. You're actually living them out in a really unique way that's unique to you, that's frankly unpredictable. So there's not much that anyone can say about it because of how unpredictable it is. But once you have that, there's the potential for that differentiation, the differentiated expression of the self, basically, in these 4 channels. So in that case, somebody can recognize you in your 10-20, and what they'll recognize is not just the generic of the 10-20, not just, wow, here's somebody who's committed to being themselves, right? They're not going to just recognize, wow, here's somebody who's an integration survival freak or whatever, or here's a moody, melancholic survivalist. No, they're going to start to recognize some of the greater potentials, the more differentiated potentials that are like, wow, I've never met someone like this before. I've met people who are being themselves in the moment, but I've never met someone being themselves in the moment like this. Or, you say something like, I am now doing this. I am not now doing that. And you say it, and there's that force of your words in a moment of full speech or true speech, and they recognize in that, I've never met someone before who could speak so truly, who could speak their truth in this way. I mean, that's what real recognition is. I've never met someone before who can XYZ. And the XYZ is going to be the channel. But it's going to be a differentiated expression of that channel. It's going to be the potential of that channel that is simply never available to the homogenized not self. So another way you can be recognized is that 4323. And again, it's the not self that's being recognized. Oh, there's a know-it-all. That's the know-it-all channel. It's part of the knowing circuit. It loves to say, I know. You're like, hey, here's something interesting for you. I know. It reminds me of that great TV show, Check It Out, with Steve Brule. It's a TV show that has the actor John C. Reilly. And from one of his gags, he'll interview somebody and he'll say, I know, after everything they say. So he'll say, so, tell me about yourself. And the person will say, I'm a doctor. And he'll say, I know. And they'll say, I specialize in animal medicine. I know. And what I've been doing for the last 5 years is working with chimpanzees. I know. He just says, I know to everything they say. Well, that's the 4323 in a nutshell. That's the not self of the 4323. It's the I know. And on the other hand, they can also say, I don't know. And they can get stuck in that I don't know. And you can be like, I've had this happen at a party where a 4323 didn't know how Bitcoin was different from banks. Everyone at the party spent an hour, 5 people spent an hour trying to teach him what the difference is. Or I have another friend with the 4323 who didn't know what the ego was, who thought that the ego in human design was just really confusing. And it's like, well, I just don't know what you mean by ego. I don't know what you mean by trying to prove. I don't know what you mean by getting offended. I don't know what you mean by, making promises. And I'm like, no, like normal things. But the fact is, when the 4323 is activated, it gets stuck on I know or I don't know. I had a 5-1 manifestor I gave a reading for with the 4323. She got totally stuck on the I don't know. She didn't know what it was to inform. I gave her example after example after example of what it is to inform. None of them got through. She would just say, well, I don't know how that's any different than simply, this, XYZ, some other thing. So she just didn't know. So I guess what I'm saying is, you look at something like the 4323, it has the potential for recognition. But that is ultimately through differentiation, through following your strategy and authority, you're able to potentially structure breakthroughs and epiphanies in such a way that can be assimilated by others, and it can have a profound impact on others, like human design, like Ra. That's a great example of the potential for the differentiation of the 4323. And then people who recognize that in Ra go, wow, I've never met someone like him before. I've never encountered someone who can explain things the way he does. He explains those so well. I mean, you're on the cross of explanation after all. So it would be the same thing for you. It would be someone who meets you and says, I've never met someone who could explain things quite like this. And it's incredible. And they become addicted to your way of explaining things. They can't get enough, and they're inviting you. And every real invitation comes with a commitment of energy. So they're inviting you to coach them for $200 an hour or something like that. That's an example of the potential of the recognition of the 4323. But again, as the not self, they're just going to go, here's a know-it-all. Here's somebody who's deaf, right? Here's somebody who will not listen, just will not listen. And they say they don't know, and I can't teach them. It's the student that the teacher can't get through to. And that's what the 4323 is. It gets stuck in its knowing or its not knowing. Just a side note, by the way, for people out there listening in, if you have anyone in your life that's 4323, you're going to be continually tested. As long as you know that person, as long as you interact with that person, tested to refuse to take the bait. Refuse to take the bait of ever trying to tell them something when they're in the knowing or the not knowing. You just have to refuse. You're at the party and they say, well, I don't know what the difference is between Bitcoin and conventional banking. And you go, okay, I guess you don't know then. Or, you're teaching a human design class and they say, well, I don't really know what the ego is. And you've just been talking about it for 45 minutes. And they're like, everything you're saying, I just don't really know what it is. And you say, okay, thanks for telling me. And, or they say, or a manifestor, and they say, well, all these examples of informing, it doesn't really make sense to me. I don't really know what informing is. And you go, okay, you don't know what it is then. Other people do know. You're not one of those people. And that's okay. Maybe someday you will know. But nothing anybody can do will bring you to that place of knowing. And this is true for any of the deaf channels. If you have a 3955 in your life, know that you're going to be continually tested to find out if they're in the mood or not. For anything. For anything. If they're not in the mood, it's not going to happen. And if you have a 2838, you do not want to engage their stubbornness. It's another deaf channel. They are designed to hold on, to never let go. They are designed to play chicken and wreck the car rather than turn. That's the 2838. So just a side note, if you know people who have these deaf channels, is to realize, you're going to be tested. Don't take the bait. Now also, don't have a negative attitude about these channels. People get really down on them. 4323 is a channel of genius, of absolute genius. The ability, all individual channels, all individual circuitry carries with it the ability to bring about the new, which is what mutation means. And to bring about the truly new, it can be incredible. All three of these. Don't get mad at the 2838. They're great to have around when you're trying to edit a book, because editing a book is a struggle. They're great to have around when you're, doing anything that requires perseverance and stubbornness and commitment and unwavering diligence and unwavering holding on and never giving up. Get a 2838 in your aura and you're set. So you can see these potentials for recognition. And then, of course, at the head ajna level, the potential to be recognized for your mind, to be recognized for the clarity of your mind, to be recognized for your epiphanies and your breakthroughs and your clarity and your answers, to be recognized as an answer person who has the answers, and then to be recognized as a skeptic and somebody who really follows through on that process of skepticism and doubt and follows through until those doubts have been clarified. So there's all this potential for recognition. But again, the real recognition happens through differentiation. Recognizing your differentiated outer authority, and in these four ways, your uniqueness. So yeah, I've met a lot of people out there who are skeptical, but never somebody who had a mind quite like this. What an incredible mind. Or I've met a lot of people who have, breakthroughs, but not like this. And really recognizing your unique ability to express these things. The same is true for profile, by the way. Profile is a generic. The 3-5 martyr heretic, it's a generic. And the reason you can read somebody's profile and they go, yeah, that's me, is because everyone's homogenized. And the more you differentiate, the more you find better and more creative and more unique ways of living out that profile. So the homogenized third line, for instance, in a relationship, is going to break up all the time. Break up and get back together and break up and get back together. And as soon as they're broken up, they're thinking about what it would be like to be together. And as soon as they're together, they can't wait to break up. And that's the homogenized third line. But the differentiated third line, well, that's something else entirely. There's no reason you can't, have a completely different understanding of bonds made and broken. If you're sleeping in your own aura, every night when you go to sleep is breaking the bond. And every morning, you're making the bond again. And you can do this with consciousness. I mean, not that consciousness or really changes anything. Something I love about human design is that it says basically the only thing that really changes is the surrender of the mind and mental decision making. People don't really change. I mean, the whole idea of change, of self-improvement, or that increased consciousness, becoming more aware of something changes it. Well, yeah, this is true at one level. It absolutely is true at one level, but it's not what human design is about. Go read Gene Keys if you want that whole mind trip. Human design is about giving up control to a mechanical process that's physical in the body, really, or in the organism as a whole, which is the synthesis of the mind and the body. But still, there's no reason a third line can't have a totally different relationship to their bonds made and broken theme. I had a girlfriend who was a 3/6, and that third line theme, we used to have emojis we would text when the bond was being broken or made again. We would text a little explosion emoji when the bond was breaking, or a chain and an explosion, and we would just text the chain again when it was making again. And we both traveled a lot, and every time we go to a different town or not see each other for a while, that bond would be broken. And that worked really well. I have a good friend who's a 3/5 who is very much aware of this bonds made and broken theme, and independently has come up with his own sort of understanding of it. And what he likes to say is, Jonah, our lives are a palimpsest of elliptical orbits. The word palimpsest, P-A-L-I-M-P-S-E-S-T, means a document that you write on and then erase what you've written, and then write on it some more, draw on it more, and then erase what you've drawn, and then write on it, then draw it, and erase it. And you keep doing that over and over and over, right? Sounds like the third line process to me, right? This drawing and then erasing and then drawing and erasing. And then he says, a palimpsest of elliptical orbits, that our orbits are only partially overlapping temporarily at certain points in time. So he has a girlfriend he sees like 9 times a year when their orbits overlap. That's perfect for a third line. So I guess what I'm saying is this whole thing about differentiation, it not only applies to the channels, it applies to the gates too, and it applies to the lines of the gates, and including the profile lines. So it applies across the board. But what is against this, what is preventing that development or mutation from occurring, is always the not self, the homogenizing force of the not self. And this is what we're going to look at next. So your single definition with 4 centers defined. So what that means is that we have 5 centers to work with that make up the not self hierarchy for you. The strongest is going to be the ego with its defined gate 21. So at the very core of the not self here is this need for control. Controlling yourself, self-discipline, controlling others. Gate 21, biting through, punishing those who try to interfere with your material resources. I mean, this is the hunter. This is a vicious, biting, hunting sort of theme. And it's the theme of the stamina to maintain control. And this is going to be at the very core. So at the very core is this completely controlling thing. I've seen it. I've seen a single definition, self-projected projector with only gate 21 and the undefined ego, just like this. And I've seen her pushed to her absolute limit and say, I just have to get myself under control. I just got to get control of myself. And then I've seen her control herself, and then from that place of control, be like, okay, everything's okay. I'm in control again. I've got control of myself. I'm not showing any emotion. I've controlled my emotions. I'm not showing any pain. I've controlled, I'm not going to take any action. I'm controlling my actions. It's about controlling. And then they control other people too. Oh, they control other people through this punishment for anyone for interfering with them. You can see, if you read some of the lines of Gate 21, it's like the authorized use of force to, or the use of violence even against people who threaten you. Because the ego is about threat. And the 21 gets violent. The 21 and the 34, which is interesting, it's not in the ego, but if you look at like 34, that has a little propensity to violence as well. And there's violence elsewhere in the chart. And I don't mean to say, nothing in a chart says how it's going to be expressed, right? Nothing says, oh, this person has Gate 21 and undefined ego, they're going to be violent. No, I'm just saying, I know a self-protective projector with Gate 21, and I've witnessed it. And I've heard her and seen her go through this whole thing of, I have to get myself under control, and also projected outwards. Get a handle on yourself, get control of yourself. You're making a scene, get control of yourself. That's a big thing for Gate 21. It's really big for Gate 21 to try to get others to get control of themselves, for them to get, it's just all about self-discipline, control, and then the stamina that's required to hold on for so long to that control. So that's the real core here. The core here is going to be a very controlled, trying to live up to an ideal that of something that would, give you a sense of self-esteem or validation, trying to live up to. There's really this, it's like, what is the undefined ego going to do? It's going to make promises that it can't keep. You're not here to make promises. Don't make promises ever. People will trust you or they won't, but it won't be based on your promises. Do not make promises. The undefined ego is going to be threatened and want to make threats. Don't make threats. Never make threats. Never give ultimatums. If you do this, I'm going to do that. Doesn't work. Undefined ego. You're going to try to make bargains. Don't make a bargain. Do not enter into a bargain. You are not a defined ego. You do not have to make a bargain. I'll do this for you if you do that for me. It's like an ultimatum. Same difference. How is a bargain any different than a threat, really? At least as far as the undefined ego is concerned. Never make agreements in that way. Bargains, commitments in that way. You can make commitments, but not from the undefined ego. What that means is if something else in you is committed, for instance, that 1020 is committed to being yourself. Oh, that's a commitment you can keep. But if you're committing to showing up every day at 6 o'clock at such and such location, no. It's that undefined ego stamina, trying to prove how much stamina it has. Never try to prove anyone of anything. Now, there's also a little bit of self-recrimination going on here of what's wrong with me? I don't have that Gate 26. Well, that's going to also need deconditioning. Deconditioning is realizing there's nothing wrong with you. You don't need Gate 26. You don't need to sell yourself to convince people of things. You don't need to do any of that. So deconditioning looks different depending on different configurations. Deconditioning from Gate 21 is that you're always controlling everything, and you can stop controlling it, or you can just watch it and realize, wow, when somebody has Gate 45, I'm suddenly amplifying this energy of control and stamina. And then you can differentiate in that and see, wow, I actually have many different ways of expressing this. I can express it as being a control freak, or I can express it through the realization that I only have occasional access to my stamina, and during those times I'm able to amplify other people's stamina and so on. And so you can have a different relationship to these not self gates. But you can see that deconditioning looks very different for Gate 21 compared to Gate 26. for instance. Deconditioning for gate 21 is realizing the world's not going to end if you stop controlling yourself. The world's not going to end if you let yourself not be controlled. If you let go of the control of yourself. If you let yourself cry and don't control the emotion. If you let yourself, say what you're really feeling and don't control what you're saying. If you let yourself make mistakes and don't control the mistakes, and so on. And that's going to be deconditioning there, is realizing you don't actually have to do that 21 stuff. You don't actually have to have the stamina. Someone can say, hey, sometimes you have a lot of stamina, other times you have no stamina at all. You don't have to get offended by that. That's okay. Who cares, right? Now, on the gate 26 side of it, it's very different deconditioning. Here, it's feeling like you're defective, and the deconditioning is realizing that you're not defective. The deconditioning here is realizing you don't need that gate 26. Similarly, for that 51-25 and that 40-37, those are going to be the feeling that nobody else is there for you. And there's going to be a lot of blame in those and a lot of denial. Like, I don't have trust issues, others have trust issues. I'm not disloyal, others are disloyal. I keep my promises, others don't keep their promises. And there's going to be a lot of denial here and a lot of feeling that it's the other people's problem. Now, as we move on from the not-self hierarchy, the next strongest, next to the foundation, is that undefined solar plexus. The undefined solar plexus is going to be afraid of showing yourself for who you really are. So you put these together, and here's like a threatened, controlling, basically, I guess I would say, feeling threatened, controlling, low self-esteem, touchy kind of emotionality combined with hiding, trying to hide it. I'm not going to let anybody else know how touchy I am. I'm not going to let anybody else know that I feel offended. I'm not going to let anybody else know that my feelings are hurt. Someone said something that caused my undefined ego to be threatened and to be offended. I'm not going to tell them. I'm going to hide it. I'm going to pretend that I'm not threatened. I'm going to pretend that I'm not offended. I'm going to pretend that I'm really laid back and not controlling. I'm going to pretend it doesn't actually bother me. And on and on and on and on. Because there's this feeling that if you tell people how you really feel, and if you tell people the truth, even if you tell yourself the truth, that bad things will happen. Usually it's the feeling that they won't be able to handle it. They'll have an emotional breakdown. I can't tell my boss I want to quit because, that would crush my boss. Or I can't tell my partner I want to break up because that would crush them. And so there's so much denial and pretending and presenting this false self with the undefined solar plexus. And with gate 22, it's going to be like, I'd better be a good listener. I'd better show them what a good listener I am and keep smiling and keep listening and keep making eye contact and keep nodding and keep paying attention to them, even though I really don't want to listen to them anymore. But I have to keep listening to them because they would be so offended if I didn't. So I can't show them the truth. With gate 49, I'd better hold on to them. It's a real possessive gate. And I can't show them the truth, which is that, I'm just not feeling it anymore, for instance. The next strongest is the G center, which you have defined. So that's not part of your not-self hierarchy. So for you and your not-self hierarchy is the spleen. That's what comes next. And with the spleen, this is holding on to things that aren't good for you. My joke with the people who have undefined spleen and undefined solar plexus, of which I am one, so I can make this joke about myself as well, is the undefined spleen will never let go. It's going to hold on tightly, but the undefined solar plexus never lets people get close. It's going to keep them at arm's length and never let them actually see how you really feel and who you really are. So it's like, don't leave, but I'm only going to show you this fake version of myself anyway. Like, stay here, come closer. Nope, not that close. I won't let go, but I'm going to keep you at arm's length. That's what that's about. And you can see that there's a lot of undefined gates. So depending on the configuration, these gates are going to be either the kind of self-recrimination gates where you blame yourself, like with gate 18. Why don't I know better how to improve this situation? Or gate 28. How do I find my purpose in this life? I hate not having a purpose. What's wrong with me that I still haven't found my purpose? Or you're going to have it activated like gate 44. I'd better be an investor and find those entrepreneurs to invest in. I'd better make money. I'd better be upwardly mobile. I'd better go after material resources. I'd better manage people who are good at making the money, then I can get some of their money. That's what gate 44 is all about. Then we see the undefined channels like the 3254. That's the feeling of blame. I don't have problems with ambition. Other people are overly ambitious. Or I don't have problems, with money. Other people have money problems. And feeling like nobody else is there for you. It can be that feeling, I got to do it all myself. Nobody's going to help coach my career. There's nobody out there who's going to help me improve my material condition in life. There's nobody out there who's going to give me a material makeover and help me get that haircut and those new clothes for the job interview. I got to do it all myself. And same with the 4816. And ultimately, this is all rationalizing why you should keep holding on. Remember, these are all rationalizations. It's the mind going, don't let go. If you let go, you're going to end up bitter. So you got to keep holding on if you want to be successful. Don't let go. Yeah, I know it's not good for you, but don't let go. Oh, sure, you're in an abusive relationship and everyone tells you to leave your partner because they treat you terribly and they're really bad for you and they're slowly killing you, but don't let go. That's how it feels, right? That's how that undefined spleen feels. We'll get to the sacral next. So yeah, you can see how each of these are rationalizations. I'd better prove myself to them, because if I don't prove myself to them, they'll just walk all over me, and then I'm going to end up all bitter. So I better threaten them, I better prove to them, I better prove how loyal I am, I better enter into those agreements and live up to my end of the bargain and make all these promises, because if I don't, I'll be bitter. And I'd better, not show them how I really feel. I better hide the truth, because if the truth comes out, they're not going to be able to take it. They're going to have an emotional breakdown, and I'm going to end up being bitter about it all. And I better not let go. If I let go, I'll be bitter. And then we get to the sacral. That undefined sacral is all about, I have to be available. I have to make my energy available to others. I better keep doing it. I better keep myself, as soon as I start saying no, as soon as I don't make my energy available to them, or as soon as I'm, not open to intimacy, because that's gate 59, it's going to be open to intimacy, or as soon as I'm, not open to entering into new sequences of events and new experiences, when I close myself off to new experiences, I'm going to end up bitter. So I have to get used to saying yes. Oh, it's a new experience? Yeah, I'll say yes. Doesn't matter that I have 8 other things going on at once and I'm spread so thin and I have no sacral energy for this and I'm totally exhausted, but yeah, I'll do it. So you see, the undefined sacral is doing way too much. They're spread so thin. They're doing like 10 times as much as they should be doing, saying yes to so much more than they should be saying yes to. That undefined sacral is like, hey, I'd better be open to new experiences, or I'd better be open to ending experiences. I'd better be open to, because it has that gate 43, it's all about ending, but it can't ever really get anything started. It can't get anything started until it comes along. The 53 comes along and is able to start something new. So you can see there's different ways it can play out. There's different ways of deconstructing it. But ultimately, the undefined sacral is going to be about being too available, doing too much. And then we get to the undefined root, the outermost shell of this. And this outermost shell of the not self, the undefined root, is going to be about doing it so quickly, in such a big hurry. I better do it now. I don't want to miss the opportunity. It's that ultimate FOMO, the fear of missing out. That undefined root feels so much pressure to hurry up. I better act now. I better get it done. If I don't get it done now, And so you can see how this is the sort of not self stack, if we can call it a stack. And the deepest foundational level of that stack is the ego, and the outermost level is the root. And so with this stack, people look at you and they don't see that fundamental. They only see the outermost. And what they see as the outermost is, here's someone who will work fast. And then they see the sacral. and they'll work hard. They're available, and they'll jump to it, and they'll be in a hurry about it too. And then what they don't see, they maybe catch a little glimpse of that spleen. Oh, it also seems like they're the kind of person who will just keep holding on to things, who won't give up. They'll get comfortable in their job and just hold on to the job because it gives them safety and security. They get comfortable in the relationship, they hold on to the relationship. You know, they hold on, they don't want to move. They get stuck in things. Here's someone who'll get stuck in things. And what they don't see is that underneath that, driving all of that, is the undefined ego trying to prove itself. So threatened by everything all around it. So touchy, so emotional. You know, when people say, oh, you're acting emotional, that's undefined ego, not solar plexus. Solar plexus is emotional, but it's different. It's not that touchiness that you get. Nervous, yes, but not touchy. So basically what you have here is kind of a X-ray view of the mental decision-making process. And the challenge is going to be, and I'll give the homework here, two things. One is going to be watch when those undefined centers flare up. Watch when you're offended. Watch when you're touchy. Look for that gate 21 of control to jump in. Look for the negative self-talk saying, what's wrong with me? I don't have gate 26. What's wrong with me? I'm not better at selling myself and getting out there. You know, look at the undefined centers. Look at the undefined solar plexus. Whenever you feel nervous about confronting somebody, you have something you got to tell them. It might be painful news for them. It might be really hard. It might be really bad news, but you've got to tell them. And you notice yourself getting more and more nervous. That's the solar plexus. Notice that undefined spleen, not wanting to let go, afraid of losing someone, right? Feeling so emotional. And I mean, there's emotionality in all of the not self. The undefined spleen can get so emotional. You know, and notice each of them. Notice the undefined sacral, doing too much, overcommitting, saying yes to too many things. Notice the undefined root, in a hurry to be free of the pressure so we can get it all done with. And so that's the first part of the homework. The second part of the homework is to listen to what you say. Listen to what you say, and that's the three parts that I mentioned earlier. So the second part has three parts. We'll call them A, B, C. A, listen to what you say. Simple as that. B, notice the statements that you find yourself saying that begin with, I am now, or I am not now. Like, I am now considering that. I am not now considering that. I am now thinking that this might be different than what I thought before. I am not now thinking any differently than I did before. So notice those kinds of statements, because that's your authority. And third, C, I guess, is to honor those, to remember them, to write them down, to honor the conclusions that you've come to by observing the truth that you have spoken. So those are the two aspects of the homework. The one thing I want to end on too, because I kind of glossed over the circuitry. So you have collective and individual circuitry. You don't have any tribal circuitry. So you don't really need to support people. You're not here to support, but you do need to share. You need to share your formulas. You need to share your opinions, your predictions. This is all on the logic side. Share the patterns you've observed. Share your doubts. Of course, when you're invited, because it's a projected channel, but you are here to share all of those things. You are also here to share your confusion. Well, I found that really confusing. And to share your clarity. But you know what? This made sense of it. It made sense when I realized this. Okay, on the other hand, the channel of structuring and your integration circuitry, your individual integration circuitry are not here to be shared. Really, I mean, obviously, there is a social aspect to individuality, which is the ability to express unique, individual, mutative, basically to mutate the tribe or to mutate the other, as the case may be. So there is that aspect of it, but ultimately the keynote is empowerment. And empowerment is what you're obligated to do here, is to keep others from interfering with you. If you're struggling to explain something, and you're on the cross of explanation, the worst thing to do is to have somebody else help you explain it. You have to explain that yourself, with your own individual circuitry, empowered in yourself, without interference from others. And the last little point I'll make, and then I'll close up this reading, is that having this individual circuitry, you're going to experience melancholy, and that's okay. And when you have melancholy, you may have heard this before, and I apologize if it's a repeat, but anytime I find somebody who has individual circuitry, I always tell them, don't try to find a reason for the melancholy. Like, you're on the cross of explanation. Great. You have a channel that's great for explanations. You have this channel of structuring, this 4323, which is part of the cross, right? And you have the 43.5 and the 23.5. So it's the ability to even universalize those explanations and so on. And this is great. And you have all these answers. But the thing is, do not apply those explanations to melancholy. Oh yeah, I can explain to you why I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling sad because you did this to me last week. I know I am sad. It's because, I didn't get enough love from my mom as a child, or, my dad was always busy, or this happened or that happened, or when I was 12 years old, I fell off the swing, and blah, blah, blah. People come up with a million reasons why they're sad. And as soon as you explain the melancholy, it crystallizes, it robs the melancholy of its fertility, of its fertile creative potential, and it crystallizes it into depression. So that's all I'm going to say there, is that never try to explain the melancholy. Oh, and then the other part of it is, be alone. Just be alone. Melancholy is telling you it's time to turn inward. It's time to be alone. So many people get it totally opposite. They get melancholic and they want to run away from the melancholy, and they want to spend a lot of time with their friends, and they want to explain where the melancholy came from. Someone came to me and said, Jonah, I've been sad for 2 days and I can't figure out why. And I said, good. That means there's still hope that you'll never figure it out. So, all right. Yeah, we have that powerful mind here. I'm just doing a little overview again. With the potential to be very clear-minded, logical, clear explainer, teacher, structurer of epiphanies and breakthroughs, who is committed to the principles of being truly themselves, being empowered in themselves. Yeah, that's what it's about. That's what we're seeing here. And, on the other side is the know-it-all freak who's confused and skeptical about all the wrong things, right? So that's what it is. It's a binary. All right. Thank you for listening. I've enjoyed this a lot. Take care.